Welcome to the RKD Group Thinkers Podcast, the podcast for nonprofit marketers. This is a show about people. There may have never been a more people episode than this conversation because, Ronnie, as you know, we choose to talk to the people about the people instead of the craft of nonprofit marketing and fundraising. And it's because we want to understand their inspirations and their motivations and their why, the why behind the brightest minds in the sector. And we have one of those today. Tell us about our guest.
It's one of our favorite people, Mallory Erickson, making her second appearance on the show. Mallory, for our listeners, she's a keynote speaker. She hosts her own podcast called What the Fundraising. She's an executive coach. She's a fundraising consultant. And all of those are titles. But to me, when we talk to her on this episode and when we've talked to her previously, she talks a lot about the whole person and getting in touch with your feelings and understanding your mindset and how those things affect everything else you do. And it reminded me of earlier this year when we put out the Nonprofit Marketers Compass. We had 4 beacons, and in that 2 of them were think dimensionally and be authentic. And think dimensionally is all about, so we're talking about donors, but it's all about how donors are not just a donor. Could be a parent, they're a son or a daughter, or like everyone has these different dimensions to them. And Mallory talks a lot about that, and also be authentic. I'm not sure it gets much more authentic than Mallory, right?
Yeah. She allows me to refer to her as the Brene Brown of our sector. And that's honestly what she is. I think one of the things that for the listening audience going to this conversation, the recognition of resistance and fear in our day-to-day activities and how to navigate it, not how to remove it, how to navigate it, stands out to me. And so be on the lookout for that. Also be on the lookout for her new book, the What the Fundraising book, which comes out on October 1st. You can actually pre-order that now on her website, MalloryErickson.com. So if you go to MalloryErickson.com/book, you can pre-order a copy of it. And we're excited to see her be able to launch that work. It's been a labor of love for her, we know, over the past year. So without any further ado, here is one of our dear friends, Mallory Erickson, on the RKD Group Thinkers podcast.
So Mallory, last time you were on our show was about a year ago, and I had to miss doing that one. And I think in the 3 or 4 years I've been doing this, Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the only episode I've missed. So I wanted to get the first question in here,
which means that I gave him permission. I gave him permission. To be clear, he's got a permission slip that's signed.
Right. It's signed, dated, notarized even. So I wanted to ask you a question about parenting, and it's funny that we were just talking about this before recording. And I also want to preface this by saying this isn't like the stereotypical question that women get of like, how do you balance being a mom and a professional? It's not that. So on your social channels and in your speaking in public, you're very open and honest about your life and your things you struggle with. You also share a lot about your kids and your family. And I'm just curious, like, is that a difficult decision that you made as you were thinking about this, or like how much private to share versus being authentic and who you are? Like, is that something you had to think about and weigh, or did it just kind of come naturally to you, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Like, yes, it came really naturally to me because I think being my full self sort of means that I feel really integrated. And so a lot of the things that I do are are related to the world I want for my kids. They're related to things I'm thinking about in motherhood. Um, and just because, like, I'm a full human and I want to be my full human self in all of the things that I do. And I don't really I don't like have containers for the parts of me. They are just all me. And definitely sharing things about my kids publicly was a conversation with my husband, and like having content online about them or their photos, like that was a conscious decision that we made together about that being okay. You know, Emmy, my 5-year-old, when she was 3, did her first podcast episode with me for Giving Tuesday. Now it's become a little bit of a ritual. People don't actually know this, but anytime I post about her online, I ask her permission. I show her the photos first. I know that consent with a 5-year-old, you could, question me for that, but she's involved in that decision-making process. And so and sometimes like changes the photo. And so I don't know, I feel like I, my motherhood and this business were birthed in similar timelines, and in COVID when everything was really integrated too. And so I think then it would have been this really conscious thing to separate my life in a way that was not the decision that felt like good to me.
It's the dadgummit, it's the perfect freaking answer, Mallory, because it's like that's you. Like that's you. That's uh, you and I have had lots of conversations about like you don't have someone doing this stuff for you. Like it is you. It is you living out loud. Um, and I love that you ask Emmy for permission around her image being shared and those sorts of things. I have seen now far more often my wife with our 15-year-old, and it's a flip of the coin. Sometimes he's just having a bad day and he's like, no, I don't want it on your gram, Mom. No. Right. Like it's so funny the way that sort of thing plays out. You are uh, the third person in the 100 plus episodes of this thing, by the way, to appear more than once. The third person. So that's kind of fun.
Oh my God, I
It's
feel so
rare
honored.
that we have repeat folks. We're going to link back to the conversation from a year ago, which again talked about a little bit of your formative path, and then a lot about fundraising.ai as that was launching last year. I want to dig into a little bit of what you shared about being a whole person and the integrated way that you show up. And I think the question is, um, how did you come to the idea of shouldering burnout with the sector? Like, how did that, you experienced burnout, and most people, maybe that's unfair to say most people, a lot of people have more of a flight than fight whenever it comes to that. You decided to shoulder it for the sector. Like, I don't mean what were you thinking in a negative way, but like what, like honestly, what were you thinking in making that choice?
It's so interesting. This is the Nathan Chappelle, like our mutual friend, and also recently wrote something on one of my LinkedIn posts, like, you know, you've dedicated your life to like addressing kind of burnout in this sector. And I really sat with that comment because what I realized is that I kind of accidentally backed into it. Like what I wanted was, yes, I hit my own burnout. But then my way out of that burnout was around finding ways to fundraise that felt aligned with me, where I felt embodied, where I felt like my full self. And in doing that and fundraising that way, it felt really good to me. And so I prevented burnout because I was like living in my fullness. It doesn't mean I never overworked. It doesn't mean I was never tired. It doesn't mean I didn't overcommit sometimes. It doesn't mean, but I didn't hit that same level of burnout ever again, because of this like integration that I found, you know, through these different coaching modalities, habit and behavior design modalities, and then like alignment fundraising. Those, so then when I sort of put my like fundraising practices into a program for fundraisers, my North Star was not cure burnout, right? It was like help fundraisers feel better and raise more money and stop hounding people for money and stop having fundraising feel like this cringy thing that we all feel super weird about. And, you know, this sort of like necessary evil, like it doesn't have to be that way. It can be really meaningful and fulfilling and sacred. And then what I found was that in Power Partners, my program that teaches people this way of fundraising, was that it was having big mental health implications for the fundraisers. And what's interesting is inside the program, phase 0 is just the executive coaching and habit behavior design stuff. And I was finding people were having huge fundraising success just from that phase of the program. And so that kind of like set me off on this like path of being like, wait a second, this organization just moved their budget from $200,000 to $700,000 just from these executive coaching tools. And then I started to learn more about, like, go deeper into the way that those tools mapped against polyvagal theory, which is like a nervous system, kind of like under trauma understanding. And I started to interview on what the fundraising psychologists and therapists and behavioral scientists, and I was just insanely curious. And I was just like, there is something here. Like, what is happening? What if the answer to all of these fundraising challenges is inside of us? What if it's not a template and another strategy and another? And then when I started to realize that all of the things we say and tell fundraisers to do are actually impossible if we are burnt out, that we cannot connect as humans, because burnout is protection mode. We are in survival mode. We are not open to connection. We cannot trust other people. We cannot laugh or like feel fully, like, right? We are completely shut down. And so we go out there and we tell fundraisers, like, just build relationships. And it's like, how? And so this is a very long answer, but like, I never was like, ooh, like burnout is my thing. Like, of course, I always have cared about wellness and people being well and whole, because that's just like kind of my, I don't know, orientation. But I never realized the core necessity in addressing it to both make our people well and bring financial stability to this sector.
Okay, so since you set off on that journey, and some folks could hear that answer and hear that response and think that it's been this incredible path of eurekas, which it kind of has been, but that's not to say that there aren't bad days along the way. Like, what's been the scariest part of the journey the last 4 years as this thing has been birthed? And what's your go-to to self-regulate when the scaries start to elevate?
I think the scariest or hardest part is trying to create an environment of certainty for my team when what I'm exploring is really uncertain. So like, I think people always ask me like, what's my business plan or where am I going to be in 5 years? And I'm like, y'all, I don't know. I want to solve this problem. And I do not know what that looks like. And what it looks like this year is going to be different in 2 to 3 years. And I'm going to try everything I can to like improve the lives of fundraisers and address this like, epidemic in our sector. And to do that in a really meaningful way that scales, I need staff members, team members in my business that are not just down to like hitch a ride on my like wild goose chase, And so that to me has really been like the hardest thing is like my own, I joke a lot that I'm like the cart and the horse. And like sometimes I just have to be like, whoa, Mallory, like scale it back. Like there are a lot of people who are depending on you to create some stability over here, like don't just create a coloring book in 10 days and send it out to like the sector. Right. And so like that for me is like kind of I don't know if scary is the right word, but like the hardest thing for me is that I have so many self-regulation tools and it's hard to pick one. I mean, I was telling you guys before we hit record, I just had my second day of kindergarten drop off and I came home and I could feel my body dysregulated. Like I was just like shaking a little bit and I could like feel the emotion like kind of bubbling up in my throat. And I knew I had to get on a call in like 15 minutes. And there were other things I was hoping to do before that call. And I was just like, Mallory, stop, lay down. And I literally just like laid down in the middle of my family room on the floor. And I was like, let yourself cry for a minute. And I just like cried 2 minutes. Crying is a great self-regulation tool. I just like let the feelings kind of like wash over me. I felt my body on the floor. I like let myself be a human. And then I like kind of slowly sat up and was like, okay. And so I think like sometimes it's about reminding myself in my head that uncertainty is an important part of the work that I'm doing, right? So like if the uncertainty gets too high and I start to feel dysregulated about not knowing where the money is going to come from or how I'm going to pay everybody or whatever, right? Like that can get really scary. And just like reminding myself, Mallory, you've been here before, you've figured it out, you always figure it out. So sometimes it's like those like self-coaching, sometimes it's in my body. Yeah.
I think the self-coaching or the verbalizing it for yourself is another part of what you just said that I find to be very powerful and clearly even as evidenced by what you shared of some of your experience this morning. Like sometimes when you say those things out loud, you are giving yourself permission to feel a certain thing or to find a path out of a certain thing. And so that, thanks for reminding me of that.
Mallory, I want to ask about, so we've asked you some questions to be very introspective. You were at an event that we had a couple of months ago, and you spoke to some of our clients and shared a lot of these ideas on the how the brain works, and this idea of moving through change. I'm curious through not just that event, but other opportunities you've had to speak with people at nonprofits and people who work in fundraising. What's kind of a read that you have on them, and what's holding them back? What struggles are they having right now in their work particularly?
Yeah. Okay. So it's so interesting. The last three words that you said or two words that you said around like in their work particularly, because as you were talking, what I realized, back to your original question around my motherhood, is that if you're trying to address the challenges that you're experiencing, or, you know, find solutions that really work, you can't really compartmentalize the same way if you're including everything in your brain and body, right? So like me being dysregulated from kindergarten drop off is 100% going to impact the coaching call that I go on next if I don't recognize that that's not a container that I'm not chopping off half my arm and putting it somewhere. And so your question about what are nonprofits dealing with right now, I mean, I think the level of overwhelm that people are experiencing, both from their work lives, whether it's because they are understaffed and doing multiple jobs. We've always worn too many hats, but we know that there's a lot of vacancies in nonprofits right now, and a lot of folks are covering multiple roles. So whether it's like overwhelm because of the number of things they're being asked to manage, whether it's pressure coming from fundraising expectations, whether it's the amount of notifications going off on their phone because everything is just going bananas, or it's the fear mongering on social, around different things happening in our political environment. Like overwhelm impacts us, all of us, right? In like, and it layers on top of each other. So you might say, I actually don't have too much work right now on my plate, but so why do I still feel overwhelmed? Well, it could be because of all of the other things in your life that are creating overwhelm, right? Like because overwhelm is in your body. So like you don't get to just like turn that off and then like go to work and feel like clarity and light and all of those things, right? And so I think the level of overwhelm that people are experiencing right now in their daily lives is creating a lot of paralysis in our sector. Like when we are overwhelmed, we start to go into more protection modes, right? That's where we see a lot more like freeze or flight, which like I think in the nonprofit sector looks like shiny object syndrome, or we see fight, which is like, why did that organization get money instead of us, right? So like our nervous system shows up actually in all these different ways we see in our sector. And when we're in those modes, we don't want to take risks. We don't want to try new things. We want to protect ourselves from any potential like criticism. We don't want to do anything wrong. Things feel very binary. We're like, there's either a right way or a wrong way. So one of the things I noticed a lot at our time together, which I was so grateful to be at that event, to get to speak at that event, to get to sit with those nonprofits and hear them like troubleshoot together and share resources and ideas. And I also heard these two words together that you hear a lot in our sector. Yeah, but, right? Like, yeah, that's a great idea, but. And what I saw in there was not that this thing is impossible. What I saw in there was that there's resistance and there's fear, and the but was like, yeah, but I don't have the capacity to be open to that right now. Not, but it won't work for us, even though sometimes that's what people said. What I really heard in there was like, yeah, but I can't get myself to try something new right now. And just the pressure and expectations, I think as people are seeing challenges in their fundraising, they're holding so tight. They're trying to plug a bucket that they feel like is leaking. And that's not where we are creative, or building real relationships, or developing engagement, or we're not willing to step away from the leaky bucket for long enough to realize that there's actually so much more water and full buckets 5 steps away, but like our fingers are in all the holes. Like, how can we leave? And I feel like that was like a lot of what I felt and saw, totally understandably, but like in those conversations.
I remember reading a book. This was a couple years ago. I need to find it and probably reread it. And it was called "The Pandemic Population," and it was about elementary school students whose lives were upended, as all of our lives were, with the pandemic. And the author cited research, even at this point, this was probably early 2021, about comparisons in the impact of the pandemic on, adolescent children at that time to the impact of the Great Depression on people, and in terms of how it flares scarcity. Like that's a big result, is just the upheaval of scarcity. And to your point about resistance and fear and yeah buts, we are fighting, as nonprofit professionals, we are fighting noble fights and surrounded by Chicken Little headlines about declining trust and number of households that are giving declining and retention woes. And like there is, we've built like Lego castles around us of can'ts, and that's hard to break through and break out of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that requires us sometimes to hold nuance and duality, right? Like we can say something I say a lot when I speak is like, look, material scarcity in the nonprofit sector is a real thing. Many people are dealing with material scarcity in their lives, in their organizations, with the folks they work with inside their organization. Yes. And scarcity mindset is an additional layer of scarcity that holds us back from being able to find solutions to material scarcity. And I think, and this is true with our level of overwhelm, right? We're seeing the level of like polarization in topics and in comment sections on social media, right? Like everybody's just like these, what do they call them? Keyboard warriors. And what you see in a lot of that is total binary thinking, right? And what we need is to hold nuance, right? To say like these things, yes, it might be true that this decline is happening here, and some organizations are seeing this, and we're also seeing growth over here. I said to somebody recently, I was like, I don't remember what this was about, but I was like, think about the transformation from like a caterpillar to a butterfly. If the butterfly was like, oh yeah, I want to be a butterfly, but like I want to keep my like caterpillar body, like that butterfly's not flying anywhere. Like that's way too heavy. So we think we're like, oh, I want to keep my, response rate on this thing, like exactly as it is. And I want butterfly wings.
As you think about this challenge, it seems in a lot of ways that it's difficult for people to, I guess, think about how to get from point A to point B, because in some ways they're seeing it as a huge leap in your coaching, and maybe this could be in your new book that's coming out soon. Like, is part of it helping people break down into smaller steps, or walking them, like how do you get them over that mindset of this seems like such a daunting task and I don't even know where to begin?
So in the book, I don't actually go into this.
Okay.
In the book, what I focus on though is around like some emotional regulation tools that help down regulate your nervous system so that you can have more clarity, right? So I think when we are feeling overwhelmed, we're like, you know, exactly to your point, like we can't see the path, right? We're like, okay, here's where I want to go, but like I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And when our nervous system can ground down, we can start to have a lot more clarity around what that next step would be. But something I teach, and I just couldn't fit it into the book, is around like habit and behavior design taught by, BJ Fogg, is making the action smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So if you can't figure out, and then combine that with a coaching strategy, which is around 1 degree shifts. So something we talk about a lot in coaching is like making 1 degree shifts, right? Often we think about something, we're like, oh, okay, like I'm gonna have a completely new blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, no, no. How can you make a 1 degree shift towards being a little bit more authentic? What would it look like for you to create a piece of content that was 1 degree more authentic? Is it about where you're recording that content? Is it about how many people are reviewing that content? Is it about you not deleting that content after it doesn't get a certain amount of likes in a certain period of time? What does 1 degree look like for you? And so I think it's like make the action easier to do, and then also figure out, like, get curious around if you're like, okay, I can make the action easier to do, but I still don't know what the action is. Then ask yourself, what's a 1 degree shift that could insert whatever that goal is for you?
I think our friend Tim Lucky is going to take and apply that to his LinkedIn habits as he is constantly chasing Mallory and LinkedIn of stuff. Okay, so that's not in the book.
It's not in the book. I talk about 1 degree
It's not in
shifts
the
a
book.
little bit. I talk about 1 degree
Yeah.
shifts a little bit. But I think like I didn't go into habit and behavior design because it was sort of a whole other piece. But in the book, I talk a lot about my coaching framework, really helping people understand the energy that they're showing up to different things with. I talk about the energy leadership index, which is through my coach certification program, how that applies to fundraising. Really, the very first step in any of this is awareness around how we're feeling and how we're feeling, and even that we have feelings. I mean, gosh, when I just watch these fundraisers like running from thing to thing, I'm like, have we felt our bodies today? Can you remember what you ate? Like, do you know? And this was for me, like, no, right? I was so disembodied. And so the very first step is just awareness of ourselves, and then tiny little bits of space. And that's not an hour break. It's like, is there space between your ruminating thoughts in your mind? Is there space between something happening and you beating yourself up about it happening? Is there space between a meeting for 1 minute for you to just like close your eyes and be like, okay, what am I walking into right now? Is there space to reflect on something? Is there space to be like, notice how you're feeling about something? Those tiny little moments, they actually are what create the capacity then for us to do the other things.
Is it fair to say, I partially want you to say no whenever I ask this question, but I know that you're not going to. Is it fair to say that the book is Mallory's kind of love letter to the fundraising sector of what you want it to be, but like contained? Like, is that the right way to think about how you think about the book? She's gonna say no, Ronnie. She's about to say no.
She's going to say it in a very good way that doesn't say no.
Wait. It is, God, it is in between a love letter and a breakup letter, but not me breaking up with the sector, right? But it's like, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of really hard things in there. And it is a love letter because I believe loving somebody means saying the truth with kindness and care, but it doesn't mean just making everybody feel good all the time, because that's not real life. And to say the things, I've been thinking a lot recently, and this really is making me feel kind of emotional thinking about this. Somebody else asked me recently, like, why I am willing to be so vulnerable about my experience, or like say all these things about how I felt as a fundraiser, and like use that to guide how I talk about things. And I said, I feel like I'm in a real position of like privilege, right? Like I'm not inside an organization right now. I don't have a board, who's going to be embarrassed about whatever it is that I said or did. Like, no, I'm completely on my own. And the only thing that I care about is making this sector better. And so and I don't feel like a martyr in any kind of way, because I feel a tremendous amount of choice and autonomy around this. But I feel like I want to say all the things that everybody's feeling and doesn't feel like they're allowed to say. And that's what's inside that book.
I can't wait for it. Can't wait. Okay, so the book is called What the Fundraising, Embracing and Enabling the people behind the purpose. And so it's out October 1st. People can go to MalloryErickson.com and follow her on LinkedIn in droves. Take that, Tim. And then that way you'll get up to date on like pre-orders and all those sorts of things. Mallory, that we think the world of you, and we are so appreciative of how you embrace the nobility of this space, this sector that we're in. And we're so glad that you do what you do.
Well, I'm so grateful for you guys. I love y'all. I love what you're doing for the sector. I think you give me motivation and inspiration to be bold, and to also, you guys do it too, say the hard thing, call the thing out, take stances that are necessary and scary, and that maybe not everybody is going to like, but because you believe in what this sector can be. And I think that's why I love being friends with you guys, love working with you guys, is because I think we both believe in what's possible, and we want to help be like pillars of change and comfort and partnership in getting us there.
Totally agree. I don't know what else to say after that.
I'm just grateful for you guys.
Ditto. Okay, we'll talk to you soon.